So let's talk about sticks. Hopefully you can see clearly enough here. Trying to get everything in shot is quite a challenge. Now, drumsticks, they vary a little bit depending on the weight and the make. I have a 5A made by Vic Firth. Different sticks have a different feeling, different thicknesses, different weights, etc., etc. But you generally want to find kind of, it's not necessarily the middle, but a point on the stick where it kind of balances on the edge of your hand. And on these sticks, it tends to be between the Vic and the Firth, which I suppose maybe is by design. And you kind of want to have that point in the loose grip of your hand. A little bit like this, but then once you get to the, you tend to hold it a little bit more with a thumb as well for a bit of control. It also means that later techniques, you can use these fingers under here to sort of slap back for some incidental notes, as they're called. Now, the one thing to think about, you can possibly see my arm here, not so much the this arm, but this arm you can. Hitting the drum is not like, that's very tiring. You don't grip the stick really hard. Most of it's actually in the wrist. Your arm is doing very little. In fact, in some respects, you could almost, apart from some subtle movements, you actually barely move your arm, more to move around the kit if you wanted to. But if you're just down here, it doesn't actually move very much. If you're doing this, you do that for effect and for volume and in certain styles and genres, but for the most part, you don't need to. This is called the standard grip these days. There is another grip called the traditional grip, which is played a bit more like this. It comes a little bit from military drumming. You get that kind of for sort of marching sounds, but often a lot of jazz players use it because it gets a bit more subtlety. And some players will actually have a mix of the two. So maybe one hand standard, one hand traditional. And especially if you're using brushes instead of sticks, it lets you get this kind of technique. For now, just stick with the standard grip, but I thought it was useful to just explain those differences there. And when you hit the drum, it is loose. You might have seen as I was playing, I'm not holding it really tight. You actually want to have a little bit of bounce back. If I could zoom in right on the stick, you'll see somehow it kind of bounces, and sometimes if you didn't stop it, it would kind of keep going. Now let's take a look specifically at this pedal. And as you can see, it's connected to here. There's actually not a lot of space. You can control the amount of space here. Hang on. For some reason it's a bit stiff. You can control the amount of space here. This actually comes up and down. And you can make it much bigger, for example. About an inch between is sort of, I don't know, standard-ish. As much as anything is standard. And this pedal doesn't actually need much work. It's almost very hard to actually even show what you're doing because it's like it's very little. Actually, quite little. And if there wasn't much gap up the top, it would be even less. For the most part, we're just going to keep it closed in this exercises here to begin with. So you just keep your foot there. And then with that in place, so you kind of hear that sound difference there. And there's a subtlety in opening and closing it, but I'll cover that at a later date. Let's have a look at the other pedal down here, the kick drum pedal. There's sort of two ways you can do this. I don't know how easy it is going to be to film this. You can have one way where you keep your heel flat and the foot flat, and you just apply pressure with the front of your foot. That gives you a bit more control, but for faster beats can be a little harder to keep it going. Or you can also, hopefully this is visible, you can kind of have the ball of your foot on it and the rest of the foot up. So like you're kind of stamping with the front of your foot, like this. This gives you more volume and more speed, but this can occasionally come back and hit you every now and then. And that said, until you try this for yourself, this is more effort than it may look. It's very different from this pedal, which requires very minimal effort. This one requires quite a lot of effort. So if we start doing something like 4 to the floor, as it's called, whilst it's very possible to do it with the everything flat way, sometimes it's kind of easier to do it with the foot up. It's all a bit personal, really. So for this example, in the 4/4 bar, we're going to play the kick drum on the 1 and the 3 on the odd numbers, and we're going to play the snare on the 2 and the 4, the even numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And the hi-hat, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, but we're actually going to do a little bit more as well. We're going to actually add the numbers in between. This is a quarter note because it's on the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4. So like a normal kind of count. But here we're going to do what's called 8 notes. So in the space of one of these, we're going to play 2 of these. So 1 and this is how we describe it. Instead of something else, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay? This is a little weird to begin with because we're now going to do 2 different things. Actually, we're going to do 3 different things at once, which can come naturally or not naturally. So let's start over here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now that 4 and is also quite important because it seems natural to think that 4 is the end. The 4 and in this case is the end. It can go further, but in this particular case, the and of the 4 is the end. Now, we've so far looked at the snare and the hi-hat, but with the snare drum, there's kind of a few different places you can play it. Most of the time, we're doing it in the middle here. You can see this is quite worn out. That's where a lot of people have been doing it. But there's also an edge around here that can be called a rib shot. It's used in a lot of reggae and ska music. And there's also a cross stick here. Sometimes you can actually turn the stick around, sort of fit that into the case there. It's used, I don't know. Now for the hi-hat, we're mostly going to have our foot down. There is a pedal here. We're going to keep our foot down for now. And generally speaking, you want to be hitting with the tip of the stick. You could also hit with here. The sound difference is it's minimal with the hi-hat, but it starts to damage the stick quite quickly, actually. Okay. And here we have the crash or the splash cymbal, usually short and sharp. And in this particular case, how you hit it makes a big difference. When you do that, that's called choking. as the sound can go on for a long time. And with the edge of the stick, you can see there's quite a big difference. So I'm going to bring this in on the 1, which means you come straight down to here for the and. And then here we have the toms, small tom, medium tom, floor tom. They have different sorts of sounds in deepness, basically, based on the size. Here is actually another crash on this drum kit. That's not always normal, so I'll mostly ignore it for now. But here is the ride. It's actually one of my favorites. Quite large. You can hit it in a bunch of different ways. If we use the tip, kind of jazzy sound. If you hit it with the edge of the stick, it's very loud. Useful, but can be overdone. But also the bell, this part here is quite fun. So let's try that groove here. That jump is obviously a lot harder, but it is possible. This is possibly why this is here. It's easier. Okay, let's try a slightly different groove. We're going to take instead of doing it on the 1 and the 3, we're going to do 1 and 3 and. And it's kind of like this part of your body is almost in unison here. So the snare will still do the same on the 2 and the 4. So okay, now let's try one last groove, which is a bit of a mix of those two. It's 1 here and then 3 and here. So you've heard this a lot probably. When I start to play it, it'll sound very familiar. With those 3 grooves, you can do a lot. It sounds like a lot of songs, actually. So